In 2025, China did not simply endure another natural disaster. The country slid into a national nightmare where extreme weather collided head-on with political arrogance, turning floods into a brutal test of survival, governance, and truth. What followed was not merely water overwhelming land, but reality overwhelming propaganda. As rivers burst their banks and cities drowned, decades of carefully constructed narratives collapsed under the weight of mud, fear, and human desperation. The myth of absolute control began to crack, just like the concrete structures meant to hold the water back. From Beijing's outskirts to the vast Yangtze River basin, the rain showed no mercy. It did not arrive as a single storm, but as an unrelenting force that refused to stop, exposing how fragile China's infrastructure truly was beneath its glossy image. Flash weather alerts were muted, official statements remained calm, and state media repeated that everything was under control. Then, almost overnight, rivers surged beyond warning levels, levees failed, and entire regions were left defenseless. What was presented as stability dissolved into chaos within days. By late June and early July, internal data revealed that more than 300 rivers across the country had simultaneously exceeded danger lines. Drainage systems failed one after another, reservoirs filled beyond their design limits, and flood control plans collapsed under pressure. Only after the situation spiraled out of control did authorities admit a shocking reality. Even Beijing was flooding. The capital, long portrayed as untouchable and protected, had become another victim of the same system it ruled over. The Miyun Reservoir, a critical water source safeguarding Beijing, was forced into emergency discharge. Torrents thundered down the Chaobai River, swallowing roads, bridges, and entire residential areas with terrifying speed. Suburbs that had never prepared for such floods were suddenly underwater, while residents received little to no warning. For countless families, escape was measured not in hours but in minutes between life and disaster. Far more ominous was what was happening upstream at the heart of China's water control system, the Three Gorges Dam. As relentless rains fed the Yangtze, the reservoir level climbed rapidly, pushing the dam toward critical thresholds. To prevent structural failure, authorities ordered massive emergency discharges, unleashing walls of water downstream and sacrificing towns, farmland, and livelihoods. At the same time, reports of structural stress, visible cracking, and geological instability around the dam began to circulate, fueling public fear. Once celebrated as an unshakable symbol of national power, the Three Gorges Dam now stood as a reminder that even concrete and steel cannot indefinitely suppress nature or the consequences of human arrogance. In Taishitun town of Miyun district, floodwaters surged so fast they climbed to the third and fourth floors of homes. A resident living along the Qinggu River recalled that within 15 minutes, water smashed through the door and filled the house. Gas canisters, furniture, and vehicles floated away as families scrambled upstairs, chased by rising waves. By the time the water stopped, entire lives had already been erased. Videos filmed by locals showed cars spinning helplessly in torrents, bridges collapsing like paper, and families clinging to rooftops screaming for rescue. There were no sirens, no emergency crews, and no visible officials coordinating evacuations. Instead, phones recorded what the state refused to show, and those clips spread briefly before disappearing from the internet. For residents trapped above the waterline, abandonment became painfully clear. Nearby Fengjiayu town suffered devastation on an even greater scale. The main road, once the center of daily life, was torn apart and transformed into a roaring river of debris. From a nearby hillside, a resident filmed the scene while crying, saying the entire town was gone and the expressway bridge had vanished under the flood. Soon after, electricity failed, mobile signals died, and Fengjiayu was completely cut off. And villagers described doors ripped from hinges, houses collapsing in low-lying areas, and roads reduced to mud and rubble. With no functioning routes in or out, rescue became nearly impossible. Nearby villages such as Jiazi and Gaoyangzi turned into traps where residents were stranded on rooftops without food, water, or power. Their desperate cries for help echoed into the rain, unanswered. As images of devastation spread, attention shifted to a massive structure looming upstream, the Three Gorges Dam. Once promoted as the ultimate symbol of China's ability to dominate nature, it now stood as a source of dread. By early July 2025, the reservoir level had surged past key safety thresholds, approaching its maximum limit. Fear spread quietly through political and engineering circles alike. On July 2nd, the water level crossed the official flood control line, and within days it climbed dangerously close to the dam's upper safety boundary. Inflows reached staggering volumes, leaving decision-makers with no safe options. According to insiders, emergency discussions inside Beijing turned grim, with officials acknowledging that a dam failure would wipe out multiple major cities downstream. The scale of potential destruction was beyond calculation. To prevent collapse, authorities ordered an unprecedented release of water. On July 16th, discharge volumes reached record levels, sending a wall of water downstream. The dam survived, but entire regions paid the price. Homes, farmland, factories, and livelihoods were drowned in a deliberate trade-off between structural survival and human cost. State media later framed the decision as necessary flood control, quietly admitting that certain areas had to be sacrificed to protect key zones. For those living in downstream towns, the meaning was clear. They had been written off. In Renhuai, Guizhou province, floodgates were opened without warning, unleashing torrents into residential areas. Survivors described water arriving suddenly, smashing doors, collapsing houses, and sweeping away everything in seconds. Experts later revealed that the disaster was not merely the result of extreme weather. Former hydrologists involved in major water projects stated that the Three Gorges Reservoir had been kept artificially high to maximize electricity generation. Safety protocols requiring lower water levels during flood season were ignored. When rains intensified, emergency discharges became unavoidable and devastating. These releases were often carried out suddenly, sometimes at night, leaving downstream communities no time to prepare. Each discharge compounded the destruction, turning natural floods into engineered disasters. As villages vanished beneath water, the government's silence became louder than any siren. Calls to emergency hotlines went unanswered, and official statements clashed sharply with what residents experienced on the ground. In Miyun, a blogger wrote that authorities claimed evacuations had taken place, yet no rescue teams were visible. Local officials privately admitted they could not even contact emergency units. With rain still falling, they confessed there was little they could do. For stranded residents, days without electricity, food, or clean water felt like being abandoned on a sinking island. The economic impact was just as severe. In Henan, farmland disappeared under floodwaters, while northern regions simultaneously faced drought. Farmers watched helplessly as crops either rotted or withered. In mountainous areas, landslides buried fertile fields and destroyed transport routes, cutting off food supplies. Industrial towns suffered heavy losses as well. In Xiangyang, Hubei province, floodwaters filled shops and workshops with thick mud. Business owners stood in ruins, staring at livelihoods built over decades wiped out overnight. Vehicles floated away, factories shut down, and local economies ground to a halt. What enraged many citizens most was the absence of visible leadership. While communities struggled to survive, senior officials toured development projects and delivered rehearsed statements. Disaster relief appeared secondary to image management and censorship. Official reports claimed successful evacuations and 0 deaths, while locals quietly spoke of casualties and injuries that never made the news. Beyond the immediate destruction lay a deeper, unspoken fear. The Three Gorges Dam holds tens of billions of cubic meters of water, and seismic activity in the region has increased dramatically since its construction. Engineers have privately acknowledged structural shifts in rising geological risks. One strong earthquake or landslide could trigger a catastrophic chain reaction. Analysts warn that a dam failure would not only be a humanitarian disaster, but a political one. The regime's legitimacy rests heavily on its promise of stability and control. If the dam fails, that promise collapses along with it. The floods of 2025 have already shaken public trust to its core. As waters slowly recede, the damage left behind is not limited to ruined towns and broken infrastructure. What has truly been exposed is a system willing to sacrifice lives for appearances, truth for control, and safety for profit. The disaster stripped away illusions and revealed a country far more fragile than its leaders admit. The storm may eventually pass, but the questions it raised will not disappear. For millions who watched their homes vanish and their pleas ignored, faith in authority has been washed away. What remains is anger, doubt, and a growing realization that the greatest danger China faces may no longer come from nature, but from the truths its people are no longer willing to suppress. Natural disasters in today's China are no longer merely environmental events, but have become mirrors reflecting a profound moral decay and collapse of social responsibility. When human lives are weighed against economic gain and political stability, the line between governance and cruelty disappears. Silent flood releases, concealed casualty figures, and censored cries for help reveal a society that has lost its ethical compass. Nature may bring the rain, but it is human decisions that turn it into catastrophe. When power stands above truth, disaster becomes an outcome, not an accident. The system's indifference spreads suffering faster than any floodwater. This is no longer just an environmental crisis, but a crisis of conscience. These historic floods have laid bare a regime that is aging, rigid, and increasingly incapable of correcting its own failures. A system that once claimed mastery over nature now trembles before the very projects it glorified. As propaganda loses its power to mask reality, social trust collapses from within. People no longer ask when the waters will recede, but why they are always the ones chosen to be sacrificed. Official silence in the face of suffering is not strength, but proof of impotence. And each disaster hidden from view carves a deeper crack into the foundations of rule. The regime is not declining because of floodwaters, but because it has lost the hearts of its people.